in a funny way, by losing in 2020, Trump almost unnaturally prolonged the Trump era. Like he sort of made himself the main character of American politics for 12 years, which, Obama, who cleaned up in 2 elections, then rapidly exited, and just sort of shuffled himself off the stage and is irrelevant. Whereas in a funny way, Trump's defeat has almost empowered and extended his sort of, his main character energy, as they say, his relevance.
It is funny that everything's talked about nowadays in these kind of literary terms, when everyone thinks like, people aren't reading anymore. People aren't, thinking about stories and whatever. And yet people are talking about things in terms of protagonism quite a lot.
Totally.
But it's true. He has been the main, we will look back, whatever else happens, at him as the main character of the past 10 years.
Every hero needs an obstacle to overcome. So he gave himself an obstacle in 2020 to overcome in 2024 to write his own third act.
It is a narrative. There's a sort of a narrative genius about it, like about that arc that is in some ways sort of provides a richer and fuller, and more satisfying, arc than just, okay, you go in and you win and you never lose and then you're done. And there's something about like Trump kind of not that he knew he was going to lose.
He tried to lose. Yeah, you're saying he tried to lose.
But it just sort of worked out for him again, and he just lands in a tub of butter for it.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le bunga, bunga. Stockholm ou Monaco, ou Montevideo, Oslo, Tokyo, on fait le bunga, bunga.
So Trump's first victory on the technicality of an electoral college win could have been put down, and by some at least, and many people in fact did do this, to things like Hillary's failure to campaign in Michigan. But now we can probably say that Trumpian populism expresses not just various tactical failures of the Democrats, but some sort of historical necessity. It rewrites the history of the past decade. So the story that goes, there were populist explosions in the middle of the decade, but by 2020, these have mostly been tamed through elite machinations, through COVID, war, inflation. That story itself now needs rewriting. If you're new to us, this is BungaCast, also known as Auf Bunga Bunga. That is myself, Alex Hochuli in Brazil, and Philip Cunliffe.
Hi.
And George Hoare.
Hey.
Both in England. We started this up in early 2017 with Trump's first win and Britain's vote to leave the EU in our review mirror, objects that probably were as large as they appeared. The end of history was ending, and the political scene would be dominated by a type pioneered by Silvio Berlusconi. And Trump, we've argued for a long time on this podcast, is the most perfect reincarnation of this figure, one that, for all his faults, almost seems expressly designed to expose the liberal establishment's most glaring weaknesses, even if not much else. We're going to find out if he does bring anything else beyond that today. So firstly, welcome, and a big welcome back to Matt Karp, professor of history at Princeton, contributing editor at Jacobin, and a man who writes widely and deeply on American politics. For example, I can suggest having a look at one of the pieces in particular we've linked in the show notes, a piece in Harper's on the configurations of American power and party politics, which is excellent. Matt, you've just arrived in Washington, D.C., I assume to storm the Capitol. Have you got your horns and your shaman outfit at the ready?
Yeah, as the working class correspondent for the BungaCast, I began my day yesterday in Park Slope, and then I proceeded to Moynihan Station, whereupon I boarded an Acela train, from which I alighted in Washington, D.C., and am now situated in a hotel, the Lyle, formerly the Carlisle, just north of DuPont Circle. So I've got my finger on the pulse of all of this working class discontent in the United States, and I'm ready for action as your man in DuPont Circle.
Excellent. So we're gonna delve right into this and get your sense on the ground in the belly of the beast, what the vibe is. No, we've done vibes. We did vibes in our preview, and now we have a lot of other things to tease out. So maybe we can start with turnout. I mean, everybody knows the result by now, but I always like to talk about turnout. I think people don't talk about it enough. Trump's vote declined by some 2 million votes or something like that. Nothing major, but obviously Kamala's vote fell by. Trying to have to do some quick maths. I should have done the maths for myself earlier, but over
12?
10 million, 12 million votes or something like that.
I do think we have to be a little careful on the numbers right now, right? Because there's still a ton of uncounted ballots in California and elsewhere. So we don't quite know where they're going to land. I mean, we have estimates, but we're not totally sure that it's not going to stay exactly where it is now. Right.
No, that's fair. The figures I give are general, but in any case, we can say that turnout was down on the 2020 election, which had this real sense of a referendum on Trump, and this time less so. In our preview episode, there's a lot of talk about the kind of vibes people being a little bit sick of politics, right? And Trump's return in such a decisive win, effectively winning the popular vote, seems to suggest that, well, that anti-politics, anti-establishment rebellion thing is kind of still going on. But I don't know. Is that your read of it, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I take the turnout number as a certain kind of signal, and I think it's a fair comparison to 2020. I don't think for all of the effort to sort of depict this election as an existential apocalyptic battle, I don't think as it was depicted in the press, honestly, by both sides. I don't think that the country this result speaks to that being imbibed by the country at large. On the other hand, the turnout still, I mean, I'm ambivalent because we're still waiting for some numbers, and B, even if it's down, it's only sort of slightly down. It's still, you might say it's a kind of a plateau that is in relative historic terms still higher than the American turnouts I got used to in my youth. When we would, in a general election, you'd be lucky to get upper 50s, of eligible, 55%, maybe 60% of eligible voters. And we're kind of living in a world where we're near 2/3 of the electorate are voting, even if it's down a bit. So I think it corresponds both. My first pass would be, yeah, it lacks a bit of the intensity of 2020, and yet we've also reached a new normal where more Americans do vote, and there is a sort of deeper politicization. Even in an election that doesn't have massive enthusiasm, you still see a kind of baked in higher sort of basement for turnout to some extent.
That seems to me good news. That seems to me good news. Irrespective, I suppose, anyone serious about politics should welcome the masses returning to politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. That this is the kind of the premise of your guys' end of history point, is that there is something to be fought for, and I think that I don't think that larger sense, and that that electoral politics does sort of contain something important has been lost, even as in other ways. Some of the real issues, obviously, in my view, are kind of corroded by Trump and Trump-esque figures. You still see, I think the participation is broadly good.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're going to get onto what we can read from society at large from this, but obviously you shouldn't read society off from politics directly, because party politics is its kind of own beast. But maybe where we get a little bit closer is in some of the ballot initiatives, because these are just straight referenda in states on important issues like abortion, for example. Do you ever read on what that can tell us, Matt?
Well, I actually haven't done the full diligence on every state initiative. I mean, my first pass is the abortion, most of the sort of state level abortion bills passed. All of them won majorities, except for maybe Nebraska, which was just shy, and didn't win in Florida either because there was a 60% threshold there. Elsewhere, they were, usually upper 50% or over 60% in support of abortion. I mean, I think, if we want to talk about this in relation to the presidential case, I mean, the most sort of confident Democratic strategists, their theory of this election and every election was that the Dobbs decision had been an epochal shift in the electorate, and we were living in a new environment. 2022's failure to produce a red wave showed this. Republicans had, terminally alienated large sections of the electorate, especially women. and that there was kind of no coming back. Trump himself knew he was on the defensive. That's why he fudged on abortion, yada, yada, yada. And, it was hard to sort of totally disprove that case because it did seem to make an impact in 2022. And I was expecting much broader Republican victories that year. And it was hard to say that abortion didn't stop them. But I think this election just utterly, explodes that theory because, yeah, America broadly supports basic abortion rights. I think that's really clear. And yet it does not see that. The majority does not see that as a basis for outweighing a larger political context. People don't vote on that in the same way, and why that is a big topic. But I think we need to sort of reevaluate our premise on that in understanding the importance and also the limits of abortion.
Can you just also say, Matt, so where does this leave? Because last time we touched upon this with another one of our other regular panelists was with Alex Gorovich. He mentioned that you had the, so it was about, his estimate was about a third of American women would not enjoy access to abortion as a result of the Supreme Court decision. And so presumably that's been chiseled back significantly as a result of these ballot initiatives. And so now the proportion of American women who'd be in the wrong state would be significantly less. So I haven't looked at the kind of haven't totted up the numbers of state populations to do the rough cut, but I'm presuming that'd be safe to assume. And so in that context, also you would have it seems to me. I'm not looking to be the good news guy on the American election, but it seems nonetheless to me that means then you have abortion rights enshrined on the basis of popular democracy and enshrined at the state level rather than being contingent on this kind of some always eccentric interpretation of constitutional right and at the behest of this how many justices there are in the Supreme Court or whatever.
Yeah, there's something to that. I mean, I think that's the momentum in terms of the numbers is from a moment after Dobbs where all sorts of states immediately at the state legislative level snapped back these either draconian or significant restrictions. Since 2022, the momentum in a number of initiatives in previous years and this year has been towards greater access. I don't know if it's quite. I mean, Florida, Texas, some heavily populated states still retains restrictions. I don't know what the numbers exactly are, but what's interesting is the Times had a big report on this. The number of abortions nationally did not. It actually somewhat increased. Has increased since Dobbs. So even between, if you're talking about individual women's lives and their bodies, unquestionably, some people there are horrific cases of women who didn't have access and suffered for it. But there's also a kind of a broad trend that between, traveling, between male pills, the sort of medical abortions via oral medicine. And in some ways, people were saying the greater salience that the media, greater awareness of this issue, it's sort of more hyper politicized than ever before. It was already more politicized here than in any country in the world. And now it's even more politicized. And there's argument that there's significantly less stigma associated because of all the kind of energy around abortion rights. So people who want abortions have largely, I don't want to, really get out of line here, but have largely, there isn't some national, shrinkage in curtailment. From a sort of a anti-abortion perspective, it's probably pretty devastating to see that this, Supreme Court decision actually hasn't reduced the number of procedures. So, I think going forward, there's likely to be more momentum in that direction. It's true.
Well, I mean, so you said that already kind of, or that this result has exploded some preconceived ideas. And I think the notion that this has been a conservative wave is partial, is undermined firstly by a lot of these ballot initiatives, which show support for a social liberal policy on abortion. And on the demographics, I think this has already been immediately discussed already on election night. numbers showing that 45% of Latinos went for Trump and stuff like that. That the notion that this could be based on some sort of racial backlash is also exploded this time round in a way that it was a narrative that could be sustained over the past 8 years, even if that also didn't have as much foundation as some believed.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's the most defunct argument of all. That honestly didn't make sense as early as 2020 when you saw huge Latino and to some extent Asian shifts toward Trump. I mean, toward or away from the Democrats, and some partly toward Trump. You saw some blackmail shifts toward Trump. That's been happening, more broadly across the working class, the sort of non-college educated and lower income electorate for a decade now. The Obama coalition's kind of magnetism for all or the vast majority of kind of working class people of color has really dwindled, and yeah, Harris just was not able to reassemble that, and it seems like she hemorrhaged another bout. One more thing on abortion though before we let that go, because I just had a good anecdote from my friend who lives in Long Island and swing district area, Irish Catholic guy, and he said there's something about Trump's this is Trump's, I don't want to say unique, but distinctive ability to sort of his slipperiness on this issue, and I think it's characteristic of him. He had his aunt posted something on Facebook like how she was proudly voting on election day for Trump because he had helped, he had done more to sort of protect life than any other American president. At the same moment, his cousin, and it's sort of another wing of the family, also a Trumper, was saying, I'm proud to support Donald Trump because he has been the kind of Republican who has not made war on women. And his so it's like two different brands of Trump, and they're literally jumping to his support for being on opposite sides of the issue. It's tremendous. I mean, you have to recognize the sort of the riz there, if as some people are supposedly saying these days.
Were they having a family Facebook argument? I can imagine. And when you said Facebook aunt, I had a very clear picture in my head, and I could imagine cousins coming in on that. And
apparently, it was like separate Facebook, like they are related. That this is a niece, but these were just sort of siloed treatment. So I wonder if they saw it. It was not a sort of a melee. It was actually just people speaking into the world their truth, which were in direct antagonism, and yet both led to the same destination.
That's a very diplomatic way to put it. People speaking into the world their truth, which they're both true for each other and somehow opposite.
Yeah.
So we don't really need to dwell on too many of the facts for too long, I think, because a lot of this stuff is still coming out. I'm sure there'll be kind of more kind of breakdowns and analyses of some of the demographics at local level and so on, and different kind of cross tabulations and all that kind of thing by the people who like to do that kind of thing. One of the, obviously the big level ones, which people have been highlighting, I think, Matt, you highlighted this already before the election. I remember on Twitter seeing that you're saying, like, look, this is complete de-alignment, what we've got here in terms of, relative to the alignment of the working class with the Democrats and middle classes with middle and upper classes with the Republicans. So this election has continued that trend very obviously. You can look at, Trump this time having a massive improvement with voters who earn under $50,000 a year, and Harris winning voters over $100,000 a year. This is reflected in even more stark terms in terms of education, where there's been a complete reversal in the parties in terms of who represents those with a college degree and those without. This has been long discussed on this podcast and in many, many other places. We don't need to kind of rehash that whole thesis. But what I want to know is, de-alignment, that's, I think, pretty clearly established. Are we seeing realignment of a kind of, do you think it's pushing that way, where the Republicans come to represent a section, or if not the entirety of the working class, and the Democrats being the mirror image of that? Or is it still just class de-alignment?
Yeah. That was an easy answer after 2020 because it wasn't, it's getting more difficult to answer now. I do think some of the getting deeper into the weeds on the data will help elucidate some of these contours. I think we've reached at least, we probably honestly reached full de-alignment in 2020, something close to it. And this year, we're seeing Republicans. I remember after that election, like Marco Rubio and others got up and started bragging about, we are basically using the sort of slightly corny language of the Democratic Socialists of America, the multiracial working class, sort of clunky, lefty rhetoric, and appropriated for the Republican Party. Now, it was easy enough to push back and say that wasn't happening. Actually, what was happening, what was sort of more fatally happening, was this, totally polarizing division within the working class that kind of prevented either party from effectively serving as a champion of that class. And that was a convenient talking point, and it, I think, made sense. I do think after this election, when we're sort of coming to terms with this, no one event is going to change that. I think broadly, we're still in the world of dealignment. Certainly, organized labor is still overwhelmingly Democrat. There's still, union households, I think, broke, again, in Trump's direction, but are still fiercely divided. And Democrats retain a large, and in many, many places, a dominant section of the unionized vote. I don't think we could talk about Republicans becoming the party of the working class, even numerically yet, leaving aside the ideology, leaving aside the sense of what that commitment means. I think even in numbers, it's still too soon to say that. But where we're at is they're moving in that direction, and like the direction of movement can't be ignored or wished away, and we need to reckon with it.
Yeah, this makes me think a little bit of the 2019 election in Britain. Some analysts of this election were saying that this is the point at which a long-standing kind of class de-alignment has kind of shifted into something slightly different. A kind of then you have the freeing the political independence of the working class from Labour in the UK, and this is a positive thing, because it then potentially means that both parties in two-party system in the US as well as in the UK actually have to make a pitch for the working class and actually have to try and represent interest and actually try and change the structure of interest that they represent as a party. I mean, do you think do you think we can talk about things in those kind of maybe slightly grandiose terms in America yet? Is the working class politically independent of the Democrats? If it was, I'm assuming this would be seen as a positive thing by many. Well, maybe not all of our listeners, but I should just say I would see that as a positive thing. But yeah, are we at that stage yet?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the you might say that the condition of perfect de-alignment would be maximum working class leverage from almost like a kind of a political science modeling perspective, and yet I think in practice, the way that's worked out in both the broad sweep of U.S. history anyway, and in recent politics, is it's meant each party kind of actually sort of, if you will, coddling and pandering to, but largely ignoring its own subservient sections of the class. That was certainly the story in the Gilded Age, of the late 19th century, early 20th century, where you had, again, a heavily sort of racialized and religiously, ethnically divided electorate, working class electorate, with, Catholics and immigrants voting Democrat, and sort of native-born white American Southerners, and native-born white Americans and Yankees and African Americans, where they could voting Republican. And, you just sort of, each party can pretend to be the party of the working class, but they're really only talking about, quote unquote, their working class. And I think that's strongly recurred in the last 10 years, where you had, after 2016, for instance, Democrats came out, really swinging. No, we're still the party of the working class. What about, and just pointed to a bunch of Democrat, working class voters who were Democrat. And that still exists. And I think, and so I think what happens is the parties don't play to any kind of broad class formation or even recognize it. They simply sort of double down on their own wing of that. And I don't think that the Republican numbers are so overwhelming that reality will have changed. And, Democrats are certainly, I mean, they still won, 85% of the African American vote. They still won over half of the Latino vote. They still won. I mean, this election was really close, actually, and especially when the final numbers come in, in the three, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Harris is probably going to have lost those all by less than 1%. This was in some ways a big red shift and a Trump slide and a epical sort of statement about the power of Trumpian populism, as you said, Alex. I think that's fair, given where he came from and how repudiated he seemed to be at certain points in the last 4 years. And at the same time, it's also just a restatement of this really basic division, in which no party is dominant, in which there's a deadlock. And yeah, Kamala, there was a redshift everywhere, but Harris retained, the Democrats' strength in most of the sort of upper middle class suburbs. They tweaked a little bit Republican, but not in a dominating way that overturned the balance of power in sort of key swing states. They just nipped Trump over the line. So I think we're still looking at largely these conditions of deadlock and gridlock and de-alignment with a beginning flavor of a realignment. We'll see what the Republicans do, though, because George, like, in other ways, I feel like this was the least populist Trump campaign yet. He picked J.D. Vance, who was a tariff guy and a trade guy, and who gave a really lacerating speech on the Democratic role in NATO. And, it was, for some people who believe in a realignment, there was a moment. And yet the last 3 months of the campaign have been all in the other direction. He effectively put Musk in as his sort of number one surrogate. He got more money from billionaires than ever before in his political career. And all of the signals he's been sending to Wall Street via surrogates, via reports in the financial press, the reaction of the financial markets themselves since he won says a ton to me about what they think. They don't fear his tariffs. They don't fear national populism. They actually are looking for him to gut regulations and get back to wheeling and dealing and low taxes, et cetera. So, and all of the sort of cryptocurrency people, the energy hedge fund people, there's a huge financial push from that side, which is, if not anti-populist, it's very different from the sort of J.D. Vance style rhetoric.
Yeah, it's the kind of the Muskers over the Vances.
Yeah.
Just to put, I suppose, to add my own caveat and to see what you think, Matt. So two things. First of all, as far as I gather, they've won the House, or are on the brink of winning the House. So with the Electoral College majority, a popular majority, the presidency, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and in all likelihood the House too, you have the Republicans, or the Trump's Republicans, controlling all the major political institutions in the states. And so they are in a position to significantly rewire American national politics, potentially for a generation. Now, whether or not they do, that's a separate thing. But notwithstanding I agree with your characterization of continued gridlock and polarization. But looking into the near to medium term, it seems to me they at least have the political option, perhaps not the capacity or the ideological vision or the cohesion, but they at least have the political power to develop that win that they have now, and potentially to embed that epochal shift. And then the other thing is to also to draw attention to a lot of these instances that I've seen about how poorly Kamala did in New York. Other instances about where Trump kind of won black votes or districts, won votes in districts that haven't voted Republican since Reconstruction. And those are kind of patchy anecdotes compared to, like you say, the fact that over 80% of Black Americans broke for the Democrats. But nonetheless, it seems like if you look at the trend, it's pointing in direction of this a kind of historic switch in terms of the way in which politics is configured in the US. It may be something akin to what happened in the 70s or in the early 80s with the Reagan Democrats, or maybe even earlier. Maybe we're seeing a kind of maybe we're seeing the beginnings of that realignment.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just on the demographic point, we'll see when more of these numbers come through, and it will be really interesting to actually look at specifically on the African American side, on the Black side, like the turnout figures, because there's that the story of Black voting here, I think, has to be understood both in terms of vote switching, potentially, although I haven't seen a huge amount of vote switch data yet, but I think there is a case that Black turnout dipped significantly in this election, so which would have hurt Democrats even if people weren't coming over to Trump. But the big sort of ethnic demographic shifts are within the working class. Yeah, are less from black voters and more from Latino voters, all sorts of Asian voters. We saw Arab voters in places like Michigan got a lot of coverage, on voting largely on the Palestine issue. Um, but I think that I was looking today. There's a huge shift apparently that occurred in Native American communities, voting, which according to some exit polls voted for Trump, which would be totally historic. And yeah, there are a lot of sort of conservative, American Indian communities in places like Oklahoma and so on. That there's a native Republican senator from Oklahoma right now, but this would still be at the national level a pretty significant shift. So you are seeing all sorts of different kinds of, racialized working class groups moving right. And those are the most dramatic shifts right now. It's not so much black in a funny way, like Kamala did. I think she
No,
matched
I don't. I
Biden's.
don't want to overstate that it was. I mean, I accept. Everything I've seen wouldn't question it. It's only that there's kind of pockets of unexpected bad news for the Democrats, even in
Yeah,
those places that they won, that just point in a direction
yeah,
which
totally.
suggests that things are going in the way of in Trump's direction, even when he's gone.
Yeah, it's like the changes. You look at the New York City map, right? Yeah, like these, Asian American places in Sunset Park, in Brooklyn, Latino neighborhoods, etc. So I do think that there's and I think there's the urban. I think I saw a stat that the urban shift to Trump was larger than the rural or the suburban. So just taking that collectively, cities, I think there's an exhaustion at the urban level with especially with inflation and with failed sort of municipal government. We can come back to that in the economic story. One thing I wanted to get back to, though, was your first point, Philip, about Republican power to reshape. I mean, I'm ambivalent because they had the same numbers essentially in 2017. When Trump came in the first time, they had the Senate, they had the House, they already had the court, um, and they were able to do the big tax cut act. They were able to do some deregulation as usual. They were able to sort of stuff the labor board with right wingers. They were able to do things that pretty much any Republican administration would do. They did some more border security and so on, but there wasn't some sort of huge shift in deportations under Trump 1. We'll see if that changes. But in terms of policy, I'm sort of not sure how much they want to do and how much they are be able to do, even with a pretty thin House majority. And in terms of we obviously have the filibuster in the Senate. They're going to pass, they're going to deregulate, and they're going to cut taxes, and they're going to sort of feed their rich friends. But I'm not sure if we're going to really see a rewiring. And I also do expect in the midterms to see a big shift back in the other direction, in the way that Democrats are they're really good at winning midterm elections now with a smaller electorate, a more motivated, professional class kind of leaning electorate. I would see both in special elections, they dominate now, which are lower turnout. So the special elections, which will come in off the regular calendar as early as next year, I bet you see, Democrats doing pretty well there. And then
So
I bet you
you're
see that. Yeah.
sorry, go. I'm just going to say. So
Yeah.
you're betting on Trump blowing it.
Yeah, I mean, look, my starting point is, these things are constantly in motion. But what I've been saying is, look, we have to remember this is still a second term administration. Second term, it's sort of weirdly bisected by COVID and Biden and this whole sort of interregnum that now looks, is going to look, I think, increasingly small and shriveled in historical perspective. But it's a second term administration, which are notorious in the states anyway for getting very little done, for either overreaching and sort of overreaching on their mandate. Like Bush in 2005 came in, beat John Kerry, hugely demoralizing for American liberals in the height of the war in Iraq, and tried to privatize Social Security. He did have an ambitious play. He controlled all the branches and so on. And there was a big blowback, and he couldn't get that through Congress. And then Katrina happened, and his popularity just plummeted. There was a kind of total fatigue and disgust with him. Obviously, the war wasn't going well. But there was something. I mean, this was largely the case. Reagan's second term, fell apart with Iran Contra. Obama didn't have any major scandals, but he also didn't really do a whole lot in his second term. There's a sort of Clinton, obviously, had essentially, Lewinsky Gate devoured that, the end of his presidency. He did a little bit of like triangulation with, in deregulation and so on in the second term, but it wasn't a rewiring of anything. So I sort of think that, and I think Trump is not himself very interested in governance, and I'm suspicious of the narrative that all the people around him are. I think they're also a bit feckless and more interested in winning and getting rich than in an ideological transformation. So I'm expecting him to go do a lot of golfing, and he's old, and I sort of think there's going to be a little bit of drift. This, if I had to, just my gut, and therefore, and there will be some resistance, not capital R, but there will be some. The Democrats have a lot of institutional bases from the media to, tech, to their own class of rich people, to universities, to lots of other professions. I don't think that the professional class is being wooed over to Trump. I'm not seeing that happening.
Yeah. No, I take what you're saying, and I think it's I mean I think it's probably right. So we'll see.
So, I mean, there's probably less to be said then for Trump's positives than for the kind of negative that he exposes on the other side. And this is obviously a huge failure on the part of the Democrats in terms of all that they threw at Trump, in terms of lawfare, in terms of the rhetoric that's been going on, in terms of trying to supercharge the rhetorical amplitude of the election by talking about democracy beyond the ballot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they've still, I think the one conclusive thing you can say from the numbers that the Democrats definitively lost this election, to the extent that, you have to go beyond, I suspect, tactical failures and even the still very important process of appointing Kamala Harris, getting rid of Biden, admitting that the president was incapable of running and therefore of ruling, but keeping him in place. All these contradictions, which I think, in my mind, seem like patent lies, which the American public surely understood as being such. Even if you're not paying too much attention, you're kind of like, well, that doesn't make much sense. Like, look, either this guy can run for president, or he can't, and he shouldn't be president anymore. What's going on? And we have a primary, but we put this other person in, etc. These things seem to me obviously contradictory in a way that is, as I say, graspable, even if you're not following the news overly closely. I think one of the big stories, obviously, that has been talked about over the past 10 years is about a demographic majority, right? And this is yet another moment which explodes that sort of myth of a inbuilt kind of demographic bias towards the Democrats in terms of youth and how youth are going to vote. We haven't mentioned actually kind of youth, in particular young men, voting for Trump quite heavily, given the youth's bias towards the Democrats, the fact of becoming a majority minority country also won't favor the Democrats. All these kind of complacent elements that the Democrats have relied upon in the absence of actually having politics, right? Of just relying on post politics of kind of management and of demographic shifts. That's been exploded kind of overnight, right?
Yeah, certainly that great the emerging Democratic majority. The guys who wrote that after Obama won have now sort of completely recanted and are actually actually write sometimes insightful takes about the lashing the failure of the Democratic Party to sort of retain its working class base outside the in all across racial groups. So I think. Look, these things are related in ways that are sometimes hard to exactly define, but the sort of the arrogance and the elite sensibility of the Democrats, which I think we saw with both the retention of Biden, first of all, going back to 2016, the anointment of Biden in 2020, the anointment of Biden in the primary, where there was this sudden and mystical convergence. Where everybody else just dropped out and endorsed him, a divided field in the primary when Bernie was running against him, and it had some success, in New Hampshire and Nevada and elsewhere. And then suddenly all of the other Democrats, they turned out they were just, stuffed shirts, and they just disappeared and said, oh, yeah, it's actually Biden is our guy once he won South Carolina. And, clearly there was this deep coordination. And then the same coordinated instinct to stick with him despite his obvious mental decline in the second half of his presidency. And then even after his Matt, when he malfunctioned on the debate stage, there was this reluctance. And then beyond that, this kind of sudden, like, okay, now it's just going to be Kamala. Like, there's just a lot of like, we're making the decisions for you energy out of the Democratic Party. And that's not unrelated to their, the demographics that are their base now. It's, it's technocrats, it's people whose job is to know better. And same thing with this sort of, I don't know how much this really mattered. You can't draw a direct line, but I do think there's a correlation between all of the sort of democratic intelligentsia that was contending over and over again that the economy was actually good by pointing to wage and inflation charts, and a sense on the part of working class voters who thought the economy sucked, that these people weren't serious in their pledges to improve the economy. Because Harris herself never said that. She didn't go around boasting about how great everything was, in a way that sort of Hillary had done. She tried to sort of at a tactical level to combat that. She ran a ton of ads. She poured her unprecedented war chest into a lot of ads, decrying inflation and trying to paint Trump as a rich guy and so on. And it seems to have made some difference in the swing states where she lost by lower margins than the swing against her elsewhere, where people weren't like seeing the ads and so on. And yet the credibility of her to make that case, when the party's own sort of internal organs are all, banging the drum about how wonderful, including like left liberals, these are progressives too, who are really at fault here in my view, who are celebrating the Biden economy and sort of saying this economy's done more. Look at this chart. You can see this. Biden has done more for the working class than any president since FDR, on these like very narrow, I think statistically dubious estimates about how inflation has actually impacted people's lives. A lot of number jiggering and time and again, they found ways to excuse the fact that polls showed that most people, including the Democrats' own loyal base, like 2/3 of black voters who still went out and voted for Harris, by the way, they said the economy sucked. Everybody said the economy sucked. And they hated the increase in food prices, the increase in rent prices, the increase in just fundamental insecurity, which in this country is not backed up by anything like a minimal welfare state. And that's just a lived reality that is, and when sort of left people would bring that up, the sort of left liberals would say, yeah, but you can't blame Biden for, the fact that we don't have universal health care. Okay, but Biden and the champions of this economic strategy have to reckon with the fact that there isn't a floor for people, and that therefore they're more sensitive to sort of balance sheet fluctuations. And so there, people hate inflation even when there is a robust safety net. So that's not the only reason, but I think it makes sense that there's a particular intensity of a particular sensitivity in a place where you have less, you have nowhere to go.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's also the from the ad side, this myth was really, really pushed. The front cover of the FT and the Economist and the Guardian would always be kind of talking about how wonderful the economy was, unprecedented numbers. The Economist had that front cover, I think, of an American kind of rocket taking off. And it's all like kind of stock market valuations and kind of corporate profits and what have you. And it was fascinating to observe how consistent that line was in the international press from the outside, and also how superficial it was. Because I traveled earlier in the spring for a couple of weeks, from coast to coast, in fact. And just as yourself, Matt, I was staying in truly kind of proletarian places for my academic research. But even in that kind of very short stint, I was shocked by how high the prices were, both compared to the UK, but also compared to remembering previous pre-COVID trips to the US when, you're always kind of, American prices tend to be much lower than those in Europe. Anyway, so, I thought like if even any of this that I'm seeing as a tourist is filtering down to ordinary Americans, then the inflation thing is not to be dismissed lightly. And all those Economist and FT stories are all basically nonsense.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, no, I was just going to comment that I want to talk about the big questions of legitimacy in a little bit, but I think it worth pointing out at this stage that, the legitimacy of many political systems is waning, and basically the sell to citizens is, you can continue shopping. That was famously George Bush's response to 9/11. And that remains to be that remains the case, whatever other types of ways of selling politics to people that politicians try to do. It's basically, you can continue to afford things. I think house prices rising over decades has been naturalized to a certain extent as just one of these facts of the economy. Oh yeah, asset price inflation. And that can be naturalized, but if you then get kind of groceries becoming expensive on top of that, that becomes kind of intolerable. And I think that is really punctures a hole in
it's a
the
really good
legitimacy of
It's a really good point, Alex. Like you say, given that so much is that people think of themselves as consumers rather than producers, and when you have so much political capital and also just kind of social expectation vested on consumption, and then you have inflation, and you've exited the low inflation world, then that kind of just pulls the rug from under your feet.
So, I mean, I wanted to ask you, Matt. I mean, I know you wanted to come into the point, so feel free to say that as well. But if this election is a rejection of the Democrats, and if you look back at the past, 10 years, the story that was being told by some was, you have Trump coming in, who's like this, a representative of some racial backlash against the transformations towards a more culturally liberal society. But we were able to kind of quash that. We did the kind of great anti-fascism thing. We can sing Bella Ciao and I'll go home. And that's over. Now he's back, right? Or in a more sophisticated telling that there was a populist rebellion, both on the left and the right. Trump was able to give more continuity to that because of various reasons about the structure of American politics, and that then nevertheless was seen off by a series of events, right? Which is what I said at the very top of the show in the introduction. That story can't be told anymore, right? I think in terms of Trump's return and that being a constant feature of American politics over this period, right? Over this decade and perhaps longer, if he's able to extend his term or, extend his politics through JD Vance into the future. So, I mean, I don't want to get too much into the future. I just want to set up my forthcoming question, which is basically much simpler, which is, in what terms are the Democrats rejected? If it's not entirely clear what people bought in Trump and what he's going to deliver, people did reject what the Democrats were selling, it seems to me.
Yeah, it's interesting just hearing you sort of set that up, like, in a funny way, by losing in 2020, Trump almost unnaturally prolonged the Trump era. Like he sort of made himself the main character of American politics for 12 years, which, Obama, who cleaned up in 2 elections, then rapidly exited, and just sort of shuffled himself off the stage and is irrelevant. Whereas in a funny way, Trump's defeat has almost empowered and extended his sort of, his main character energy, as they say, his relevance.
It is funny that everything's talked about nowadays in these kind of literary terms, when everyone thinks like, people aren't reading anymore. People aren't, thinking about stories and whatever. And yet people are talking about things in terms of protagonism quite a lot.
Totally.
But it's true. He has been the main, we will look back, whatever else happens, at him as the main character of the past 10 years.
Every hero needs an obstacle to overcome. So he gave himself an obstacle in 2020 to overcome in 2024 to write his own third act.
It is a narrative. There's a sort of a narrative genius about it, like about that arc that is in some ways sort of provides a richer and fuller, and more satisfying, arc than just, okay, you go in and you win and you never lose and then you're done. And yeah, there's something about like Trump kind of not that he knew he was going to lose.
He tried to lose. Yeah, you're saying he tried to lose.
But it just sort of worked out for him again, and he just lands in a tub of butter for it. Because it actually is sort of only affirmed, as you say, Alex, his sort of relevance and his. I mean, I do think though if you want to talk about the future, I think on the Republican side, I do think that a lot of the Trump energy is autochthonous to him, is kind of just, it comes from him and it stays with him, and he hasn't been able to export it to any other character in this drama. Like, I don't think JD Vance has it. He may have something else that in which Trumpism could be translated into, but he's a very, very different kind of figure, just stylistically, biographically, even ideologically, I think. And I don't think it's at all taken for granted that he's like some kind of natural heir or successor. Even within Trump world, I think he would be fiercely opposed, and I'm not sure there's no one just on the base level with anything like Trump's charisma, Trump's ability to sort of his slipperiness, his ability to be on all sides of the issue, to win both sides of a Facebook ant showdown. That's incredible. No one else has that flexibility.
Real skill.
So, yeah, it's distinctive, and I think also he speaks in a funny way. Vance has maybe more pro-worker policies, but Trump, I would bet, has a sort of sensibility that is more anti-elitist, sort of rebellious, kind of discontented, in a way that a kind of like, oh yeah, here's my like well thought out story about how the rail companies are screwing consumers, which I just saw a little clip of Vance talking about making a effectively a left wing point about how business profits are privatized and risks are socialized, and kind of making these sort of formally populist arguments. But I actually just don't feel like his style actually embodies that in any way, and he would sort of strike. He can't even order a donut normally. Like he's not a successor of Trump, and nor do any of the other mainline Republican types, the DeSantis's, the Nikki Haley's, whoever. I sort of don't see Trumpism. Maybe someone new will emerge, maybe some celebrity figure, but no sort of current elected Republican has a prospect of kind of harnessing that energy. So I wonder if actually things will slump a little bit back towards some kind of norm, and settle in that de-alignment way, rather than extend towards further realignment after this election.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because the question I was going to ask, and maybe rephrase the same one I just asked to insist on it. But is that, one of the themes that we've most discussed, I think, if you're to look back over our episodes of the past 2 years or something, has been the institutionalization of populism, right? The kind of way that populists have become part of the furniture, have kind of circulated in and out of government, no longer as a big, it's not like big news anymore. The populists win, have a breakthrough in yet another country, or indeed in the same country once again in a different form. And Trump is another case of that. And everyone just kind of shrugs, right? And this is what we were saying, I think, before we started recording, that there wasn't the hysteria of 2016 now in 2024. So what I wanted to know is whether Trump is still a vehicle of anti-politics. Is he still a vehicle of anti-establishment revolt? You referred to his stylistic capacities and ability to channel that, but is there anything more fundamental in that? I mean, does he rock the boat, I guess?
I mean, he says on several scores, he broke with the Republican Party, not just in terms of his style and the fact that he, embodied a sort of a distaste for the bipartisan elite that few politicians had done, right? When he was booed at the Republican debates for, mocking John McCain or sort of attacking Bush's wars and so on. And then obviously the same with Democratic and liberal elites. He has that, but also substantively, if we want to do a substantive account of Trumpism, I mean, he did make some really important pivots on the populist, in populist terms. He, took, unlike Bush, who had clearly made the, privatization of Social Security the sort of the bedrock of the existing New Deal welfare state. He'd made that his ultimate goal. Trump has specifically taken that off the table. Yeah, he may allow. He may sort of whisper other things around the corner, but he put that in the Republican platform, which is, actually a very strange thing to see in a Republican platform in comparison to even 10 years before. Mitt Romney probably would have wanted to sort of, securitize Social Security. And yet, so he's done that. And I think that sort of took off a certain kind of fear of Republicans off the table with a lot of voters, and made other things possible, because he's, you can't go around canvassing for a Democrat and saying, oh, he's going to take your Social Security. I mean, maybe he will, but he's politically made himself the guy who won't do that. And then on trade, obviously, right? So he talked a lot of game on trade, and he actually passed some, trade restrictions that we hadn't seen. And this was again, not unheard of for a Republican, but a significant break, certainly from the sort of reigning turn of the century, conservative neoliberalism and so on. So where will that go? I think that stuff is kind of baked into the Republican Party. I think that will persist. I don't think they're gonna sort of go back after Social Security now at this point. I don't think they're going to become a free trading party, although there's still rooms for maneuver, because you can turn Trump's tariff talk to just tariffs on China. And actually, you're already seeing headlines about increased trade with India and Japan. And it would just be funny. I heard Vivek Ramaswamy talking to Ezra Klein the other day, who's like the anti-Vance Trump coalition, as a different kind of national populism. And it's like, are the Republicans going to rerun the TPP? Essentially is which was Hillary Clinton's kind of the sort of NAFTA Part 2 for the Pacific that cost that Bernie trashed Clinton for, and won Michigan in part because he successfully painted Hillary as the product of multinational capital. And now you have Trump's order basically with a kind of an anti-China on an anti-China talking points. They're talking about freeing trade with India, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, etc.
I mean, this is interesting, I think, in terms of prospects, because I think a lot of it is kind of typically Trump kind of tough talk, in terms of trying to expecting that people will be more willing to cut deals off the back of tough talk about tariffs in advance of coming into power. But at the same time, it won't be hard to show the models that even tariffs on China will feed into inflation, which is exactly what Trump won on, right? So there's, I think, the way in which the politics of tariffs, I think, are going to be really important, in fact, to the way in which Trumpism plays out, and whoever kind of muscles up to be the heir, as you say.
Sitting in, just another anecdote, sitting in the hotel at breakfast this morning, there was an American guy and a couple of what seemed to be Japanese businessmen talking, and they were talking English and in Japanese, and they were clearly talking about Japan and Trump. And I just heard the American guy say, "We're still trying to figure out what's real and what's rally." And like, it was just like, these are things that are happening on the ground right now, but there's a sense that there's something real that's beyond the rally with him, and we'll see that the business class is aware of, and we'll see how it plays.
So, given the rejection of the Democrats, and given also the very interesting portrayal you give in this Harper's piece called Power Lines, Matt, of the structure of American power, you go through kind of ideologically, militarily, politically, economically, what the base of the parties are in terms of voters, who their supporters are, who their donors are, and the main picture that comes across is like the Democrats really kind of are on top. Right? That the Democrats effectively represent the knowledge economy ideologically, economically, in terms of muscle. And the only way that they haven't been fully dominant is politically, because, the Republicans still, control governorships of states, still control the House, etc. And now, of course, control a lot more. So how do you read this election in light of what you wrote in that piece?
Yeah, I was sort of trying to do a back of the envelope calculation of social power, using, Michael Mann's, IEMP model, which is sort of,
that's not the director for so no confusion, no explosions in this.
Yeah. There's an amazing moment in his first volume of The Sources of Social Power where Jamie Foxx is driving this cab. Yeah, but it's this totally silly thing to do on one level, but on the other level, it was trying to sort of think. It was an attempt to think at least quasi systematically about where power resides in the economy today, which is in society today, which is not just a matter of like totting up, popular votes or I did do a lot with campaign contributions, but I think that it's clear, Hillary Clinton boasted, and I don't think it's irrelevant, that in 2016 she won the gross national product of the of the regions that she won far exceeded Trump's gross national product, and I suspect that's still totally true with Harris. Maybe diminished a little bit. And clearly, Trump did enlist a larger chunk of both the financial and the sort of techno elite class, especially at the CEO billionaire level, than I think Clinton or than he had done in previous terms. But I think if you look just below the kind of CEO level, just below the actual literal sort of Musk billionaire, this guy Timothy Mellon, who gave Trump hundreds of millions of dollars, if you look just below that level of the kind of like rogue entrepreneur type, if you look at the vice presidents, if you look at the kind of the boardroom personnel of virtually any of these companies, from Goldman Sachs to Bain Consulting to Google, you find Democrats. And these companies are headquartered either in blue states or in blue cities within red states, or and even if they have certain kinds of controversial views on some issues, they're broadly within a kind of a liberal ecosystem of thought and knowledge and political affiliation. And I think that matters in terms of both forestalling this idea that Trump is in complete command of American society now. Because, in terms of how capitalism works, it's obviously bipartisan, but in the sort of most dynamic and other ways, sort of profit making and future facing industries in the country are in the knowledge economy, right? And Republicans still win on essentially excavation of natural resources, and they still dominate in fast food and other industries that are traditionally kind of right wing. Some retail, but none of these would you describe as like the tip of the spear of the 21st century economy. And then you move into the cultural sphere. People are talking about a big backlash to this is a backlash to wokeism, and there may be some truth to that about certain forms of cultural radicalism that turned out to be not as popular as that Trump leveraged with the masses. But I think broadly, with the abortion vote and with all sorts of other state level votes and the direction of American politics in 20 years, Democrats are winning hearts and minds on a lot of the culture war issues too. They're certainly not losing ground. It's just a question of maybe they can't have a complete route, but they're not actually backtracking. And then even in terms of the deep state itself, the security state is more Democratic leaning than it's ever been. In terms of, you saw that with the way that the CIA, et cetera, kind of eventually managed to get Mike Johnson and House Republicans to get on board with funding for Ukraine. And, Trump is at war with his generals. And there isn't a prospect of some sort of right-wing military force coming into society, because I think large sections of the sort of intelligence apparatus are, again, in these blue educated elite, sectors of the population that largely they're not left-wing liberals, but they're not MAGA Republicans either. And what does that mean? It means that the Republicans the sort of chief hope, the big quadrant of American society where they're most competitive is simply in winning elections. And so this is a sort of a vindication of that theory, that they actually are good at taking their case to the masses. And there's a basis for this sort of popular sense that, yeah, Trump's a billionaire. Yeah, he's a rich guy. Yeah, we know he has a lot of rich friends, but the powers that be are opposed to him. And that's like not wrong as like a gut level analysis of American society, And so it doesn't mean that voting for him is going to actually challenge that power. I don't think he's going to throw Mark Zuckerberg in prison. Maybe he should, but I don't think he's gonna. But it does mean that sort of at the deep instinctual level, like that sense of he's against them, is not actually a fabulation on the part of these voters.
No,
so
and
I think
that connects. Sorry,
yeah.
go on.
No, I'm winding down. Yeah.
It was only to say, I mean, that connects to the transgressive aspect, the transgressive appeal of his charisma, exactly as Berlusconi. That was the way he kind of indicates his willingness to break the mold of the existing, kind of politesse and etiquette of politics of the day. And yeah, I mean, so the two things connect very clearly, it seems to me, and people always misunderstood the real political significance and meaning of his crudity and obnoxiousness and vulgarity.
And the dictator fascist argument, of course, just fuels the same thing. The sense of, we'll do anything to stop this guy. We'll pull out all sorts of, implausible hyperbole or construct various scenarios that, try to make him try to anathematize him. Kamala even I think she ran a sort of a pretty disciplined campaign in avoiding this kind of language. But then in the last week, she said that Trump's attack on Liz Cheney for being a chicken hawk was, quote, disqualifying. And it's like, that's exactly that kind of disqualifying, that's that rhetoric that is about, you're judging an examination at school. Yeah. It's not this isn't a sort of a formalized, debate team competition. This is real politics here, and there's a certain way in which that logic creeps in, even when they're trying to keep it out.
Yeah, and they've even got
Absolutely.
shady operatives in from UK Labour to help them.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The
That
Trump
definitely
threat,
swung
that.
it. In fact, I think that swung all of those states was definitely having Labour Party people on the doorstep. I can guarantee you, any interaction with anyone in the Labour Party will show you why the Democrats lost.
Right. So you may have heard that this is the year of democracy. Well, unfortunately, that's over because Trump's back. Democracy's been No, I'm joking. That's not where we're going. But there's been elections around the world. Supposedly, more people have gone to the polls this year, 2024, than at any other point in history. We've covered a whole bunch of them, just to pat ourselves on the back. I'm going to read these out. Then covered elections, sometimes more than 1, 2, 3 episodes on France, India, Georgia, Slovakia, the UK, Mexico, Portugal, Indonesia, El Salvador, China. It's not a real election, but we still talked about it. Anyway, the point of highlighting all this is that there is a global anti-incumbency wave. This has been, I think, increasingly talked about. There's been charts in the Financial Times, I remember demonstrating this empirically. So you don't even have to believe my words about it. You can go and look at the numbers if that's what you need to be convinced by. And the main argument that is put forward to explain this anti-incumbency kind of thrust around the world, but particularly in Western countries, is inflation, right? And I think we've already touched on the way that this inflation in consumer prices has undermined the legitimacy of regimes. But I think it's important to say that there's a long-term crisis of legitimacy that we've been talking about for a long time. And it can't just be like, oh, it's because Russia invaded Ukraine and we also had COVID. And then, there were supply chain disruptions. And therefore, now people don't like politics anymore or don't believe in politicians. That would be...
It's more
to
than
only
that,
take the last chapter of the story.
It's true. It's more than that. So, I mean, listeners will see a link in the show notes to the graph that Alex is referring to from the FT, with the FT's data guy, John Burns Murdoch, or Murdoch Burns, or Murdoch John Burns, whatever he's called anyway. I mean, with him, like I always find, it's kind of your very banal kind of bien pensant liberalism with data, kind of. However,
but the data's pretty. The data looks
data
pretty.
is very pretty, and he's a very good data prettifier. But I would say two things, right? I mean, it seemed, like I think a lot of it is cope, right? He's kind of trying to get some distance with the data on the horror of Trump's win. But also, I mean, there's two linked elements, right? It's not just an inflation of shocks. It is it was the result of chosen policies, not least kind of supporting the proxy war in Ukraine. And everything leading up to it, and the leading up to the Russian invasion. And so to that extent, you can see, insofar as inflation is a consequence of the Russian invasion, it is the result of policies. It's not like an asteroid hitting the Earth. And similarly with lockdown, right? I mean, lockdown was policies chosen by states and elites. And so all the disruption, all the inflationary disruption that has occurred as a result of supply chain snapping or being reconfigured, or firms jacking up their prices to profit out of the opportunity and so on, again, it's a result of policies, chosen policies. And I think that's important to qualify the anti-incumbency fever of John Burns Murdoch.
Policies chosen and also policies unchosen, in terms of like various efforts to to restrain that incredible profiteering that's happened, which we've seen in lots of evidence of. That the Biden administration, whatever it did, and Kamala talked about cracking down on price gouging, but they didn't actually do any of that, or vanishingly little of that. So yeah, on both sides, it's true. Yeah, and I actually also, I think the inflation argument is really important, and yet it's interesting how it's quickly been converted into a whitewash for like, oh, what can you do? And hey, look at this map. Everybody went right, and it was thermostatic. That's suddenly like a hot word. And it was, it just goes back and forth. It's a pendular movement. And then it was about inflation, and every incumbent lost. Doesn't matter. And nothing to see here. And that's obviously sort of a ridiculous way to understand a big election. And also it's just particularly so suspect because it had nothing to do with what anybody was saying, a few days ago. They were all saying this is about democracy. This
Absolutely.
is about,
Absolutely.
and then suddenly it's like, oh, well, it's normal. Incumbents lose, especially when prices are high. Anyway, it has nothing to do with the sort of whole kind of politics that we embodied and espoused. Let's throw that out the window. This is just beyond our control. So that's sort of ridiculous. But at the same time, I think it is clear that you don't want to go too far in the other direction, because we have learned something as a which I think should be in a way troubling for not just for the complacent liberals, but for any kind of left politics about. I mean, I would have taken for granted that, just in crude political economic terms, that to do a sort of, to make America more social democratic, you would probably want some kind of moderate inflation going. You wouldn't want to be an inflation hawk at the Treasury, that was at the Fed, that was, sort of watchfully, you would side with unemployment. You want to keep you would think that employment is more important than inflation morally and politically, and you would. I mean, that's just like the conventional wisdom for any kind of even soft left project for the last 50 years. And if we now know that there's this steeper political price to be paid for this, for any number of reasons, that demands a different kind of political logic. I think it might demand a different kind of social democratic politics. And that the sort of the Biden Keynesian thing, which I don't actually hold to blame as far as I can tell for the actual inflation, that seems to be overblown on the part of the right. But nevertheless, what I think the left and left center have to reckon with is this kind of, we're consumers and not producers now. And even if wage gains do keep pace, I don't think they really did, but even if they do keep pace with inflation, we still hate paying $8 for a box of cereal because it's outrageous. And I feel this way. So I know that if it's in me as like a, professional, as a sort of a well-compensated professional, then imagine if I were closer to the bone in 100 other ways. That, there's just this sort of psychology of inflation that I don't know I don't know how much we want to take that into account with politics going forward.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, firstly, I think some of the wrong lessons
been a
may
big
be
thing in
taken.
Brazil, right? I mean, that was Perry Anderson's big thing about how inflation constantly wrecked the left in Brazil, including the Workers' Party.
How many?
Well, indeed,
how many cereal boxes could you get for $8 today, Alex?
I mean, in Brazil, you get loads of cereal for $8. US dollars, man. That's over 40 here. Anyway,
you could do a full Jerry Seinfeld apartment with cereal.
Yeah. But I think that's right. In one of the interesting things, I mean, you brought up Brazil, so I'm going to take the bait. But one of the arguments made about Brazil is that the sub-proletariat, right, so not really members of the formal working class, either because they're kind of agrarian laborers or they're precarious laborers in cities, micro-entrepreneurs and so on, are more sensitive to inflation because they don't have a way of increasing the wages. And therefore, their policies tend to be kind of, small c conservative at the very least in terms of...
that's the shift to Bolsonaro among the poor.
In part. So, I mean, the argument there is that, especially as the formal working class continues to be unwound and unbuilt, even in the most developed societies, that inflation becomes ever more a sensitive issue. And Matt's absolutely right to highlight that the politics of inflation are, I think, inherently kind of lean conservative, because it's about putting a lid on an economy which might get overheated, and to prevent prices from rising too much, right? Because the other side of the equation is not going to increase. If you're self-employed, you're going to feel price rises because you cover all your own costs for your own business, etc.
Yeah, but the argument is to get people into unions and to get people, to get the political contestation over the social surplus and over social product again, and to see ourselves as producers and not just as consumers.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that is the political answer. It's just that the winds are blowing in a different direction, so we're having to kind of walk into that stiff breeze. But I do think it's interesting how this is going to play out in terms of.
It's somewhat unfortunate, Alex, stiff breeze, but never mind.
What do you call it?
Let's just carry on.
Fine. We don't need to talk more about the winds of change and all this sort of shit.
But yeah, I think to finish off, I wonder what this says about this election. Finally says, if we want to round out any points about the legitimacy of the American political system, or indeed about kind of the political systems elsewhere, because the rejection. Again, let me rephrase this, because we're sitting in this to kind of write ourselves a bit into the story. We started off this project already, back in 2017, looking precisely at this at these populist eruptions and the massive crisis of legitimacy. And we've gone, through the ringer and through a whole range of different events, which led us to believe that perhaps, the cat was out of the bag permanently. Other people are arguing, actually, no, kind of all the political excitement around that has now declined, and then it's come back, and so on. And now I think the return of Trump does pose a big question once again about where we stand. So I don't know if you guys want to have anybody want to take this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the main sort of meanings of this election is, the end of history was real. It wasn't it wasn't a blip. We're seeing it partly through this process of class dealignment, maybe class realignment to come in the US. It wasn't through Bernie, as it seemed might have happened at one point. It was through the right as the potentially kind of anti sort of system actor in American politics, at least. So yeah, I guess my conclusion is kind of we were right, and that's never really a particularly interesting kind of note to sound. But sometimes you have to give yourself some props that there is a certain through line through the end of history period, and this I think is an election which you can sort of see in those terms. So I think Alex, you starting off on this note at the beginning and us returning to it is apposite, because it is it's an election that the Bungercast listeners, I think, can understand, even if they might not embrace the result necessarily.
Yeah, I would. I'd say a few things then. So, Elon Musk has made a big pitch for podcasts as part of the election. Kind of his claim about the legacy media kind of controlling this ideological bubble, and the fact that you had that kind of meme or that widely shared clip of that guy who said, "I decided not to vote for Kamala because she refused to go on the Joe Rogan podcast." And so there's a claim which I think is probably only gain greater credence, that this new media sphere of podcasts and Twitter, X, and so on is genuinely influential in terms of the way in which people construct their own narrative or counter narratives to the one that is pumped out by the mainstream press. So, on that note, we can say that I don't know that we can quite claim that we swung any election quite on the scale of Joe Rogan.
Not yet.
Not yet, but we have ambitions. So listeners, hold on for the Bunga future. I wanted to conclude with just two things. The first is, I have to say I'm happy that Kamala lost for all sorts of reasons, and I'm going to develop on that, but also just on a very kind of on a very basic level. I think she's repellent in a way that, authoritarian kind of legal bureaucrat, distilled essence of the professional managerial classes, but repellent in a way that even Hillary Clinton wasn't. I think I still had kind of grudging admiration for Hillary back in 2016 and 17, just because, you could see she's a fighter and a bruiser. And she was of that generation of women that really had to fight, I think, genuinely fight for their public lives and their careers and their public space in a way that I don't believe that Kamala really did, and she just didn't have the kind of political chops that even Hillary had, despite the fact that Hillary lost, and kind of played so poorly in that election. But
look at where we've come. Look at where we are. This election is so bad. It has Phil looking nostalgically back to,
I know, right?
to Hillary Clinton.
But also, I mean, but the thing that really kind of made me feel this kind of depth, this intense distaste for Kamala was that famous clip where it was an interview, I think, with Colbert, or one of those kind of douchebag American TV hosts. But he was taking her to task for when she called Biden a racist. This was back in when she stood as his VP. She called Biden a racist, and then went on to stand as his VP. And he was saying, "Well, why are you standing with this guy who's a racist?" And she started braying into the camera, laughing. This was during COVID, so it wasn't a face-to-face interview. Braying into the camera, laughing, and she just said it was a debate. And he tried to kind of get back in and say, "Okay, but you did accuse him of racism." And she goes, "It was a debate," just laughing hysterically. And that profound lack of unseriousness, the lightness with which you accuse people of being racist to score kind of points, like a debating society, like you said, Matt, this kind of, oh, that's disqualifying. This kind of view of politics that it's all kind of on campus and it's all kind of formally controlled and overseen and regulated by people that basically, rig the game in your favor. And the fact that you would just be so cavalier about it, that just filled me with disgust anyway. So on a very basic level, I'm glad that somebody whose approach to politics is like that has been beaten. Anyway, the point that I really wanted to make was, and I tweeted about this in advance of this recording, I think what's historic about this election and gives it a world historic character beyond America's centrality to world politics is that the American masses, particularly given that we're seeing this kind of increased interest, including from first-time voters, and the greater kind of plateau that we talked about at the beginning, they've rejected anti-fascism, the politics of anti-fascism, and I think that's vital. So they've rejected the claim both that Putin is Hitler and that Trump is Hitler. And that, I think, is really kind of historically important, to refuse the anti-fascist blackmail that has been so crucial to Western political life, and American politics included, going right back to when Stalin dissolved the Communist Party into the New Deal in the 1930s. And that moment becomes a centerpiece, I think, of the New Deal state, but also of American politics and public life, and also the default stance of the left to constantly accept lesser evilism, the default stance of the American left to sell, and the left more widely to sell to voters, lesser evilism as the appropriate response, and how that constant demoralizing offer has just consistently pushed the left back as a popular and democratic force over the course of the last 70 years or so. So anti-fascism is the reason that you go for bourgeois democracy, as the Marxists called it, as opposed in place of communism. And then it eventually becomes the reason for accepting Clintonite neoliberalism over welfare programs and the Great Society. And then it eventually becomes, kind of this pantomime existential struggle over democracy. And then it's going to be, Hitler is coming back, and it's going to be the Fourth Reich if Trump takes over. And so that pattern, it seems to me, is broken. And that the masses have seen through it. And that is a tremendous thing. And I'm going to take that to the bank. No matter what else happens, the fact that the masses have refused to allow themselves to be blackmailed seems to me a genuine gain. I'm not sure that the radical left is going to learn anything from it, because they've retreated from this prospect by retreating to Gaza. Kind of the genocide Joe thing, that the Democrats don't gain our support because they support a genocidal assault on Gaza. And in that way, the legacy of anti-fascism is preserved as the highest value of the left. What we stand for is to be against fascism, against wickedness, against moral depravity like genocide, against the violation of international law. And being unable to offer anything positive. And so the radical left is preserving the core of anti-fascism, but retreating away from Western public life to the ruins of Gaza and trying to hold on to them. So I don't think they're going to learn anything from this. But at least it seems to me, like I say, the voters have seen through it. And so for that, I think that's a win. And it should be defended as such. I'll leave it there.
All right, Matt. Any final words?
I actually think we should leave it with Phil's epic monologue there. I think that's I don't agree with every syllable, but it was a worthy statement, and I think he's on the pulse of the moment now. So there's something to it.
All right. Very good. Listener, if you were here to hear about who Trump's going to pick for his personnel and all the rest of that, we'll be doing analyses on that in the future. But for now, we hope we've been able to shed some light on what the meaning of this election was beyond some of the numbers. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Matt, again. You should come on more often. We should do this again. And that's it for now. Catch you later. Bye-bye. Well, when he first announced his bid in 2015, he came down an escalator, right? A golden escalator, right? So that's what I'm going. Yeah, that's
he's going up, not down.
Well, we're all going down. We're all going down, deep down.